It is 2013, early morning in New York City. Federal agents move through the lobby of a Manhattan apartment building before the doorman can reach for his phone. They already know the floor. They already know the unit. They have been watching for months. The black cars, the men in expensive suits arriving after midnight, the thick envelopes changing hands in elevator lobbies. What they are about to find inside is not a crime scene in the traditional sense. There are no bodies. There are no weapons. There is just a woman standing in her kitchen in a robe, and behind her, a life so elaborate, so precisely constructed, that it had taken the FBI the better part of 2 years to fully understand what they were looking at. Her name is Molly Bloom. She is 33 years old, and the life they are dismantling in this moment was built on poker. Not ordinary poker, not the Friday night game in someone's basement. Molly Bloom ran the most exclusive, most glamorous, and most expensive underground poker game in the history of Hollywood, and then transplanted it to Manhattan, where it grew into something that reached into the Russian underworld and the deepest corners of American celebrity. At her tables, the buy-in was never less than $10,000. On certain nights, the pot exceeded $1 million in a single hand. In the years she ran the game, she earned millions of dollars in tips and rakes from men who could not stop coming back, men whose names, if she had ever spoken them aloud to a federal prosecutor, would have guaranteed her freedom. She never did. This is the story of Molly Bloom, former Olympic hopeful, poker empress, and one of the most unlikely criminal defendants in the history of American law. It began in the mountains of Colorado, and it ended in a Manhattan courtroom. What happened in between has never been fully told. She was born in Loveland, Colorado in 1978. The second child of Larry Bloom, a professor of psychology, a ski coach, a man who believed intensely in structure, excellence, and what he called the architecture of achievement. Her mother was a therapist. Her older brother Jeremy would go on to become a professional athlete, first a mogul skier on the national circuit, and then a professional football player in the NFL. Her younger brother Jordan would become an orthopedic surgeon. The Bloom family did not produce average people. They produced people who were expected to be exceptional, and who, through a combination of genetics and relentless pressure from their father, very often were. Molly was skiing competitively by the time she was in elementary school. Not recreation skiing, not ski club, competitive mogul skiing, a discipline that demands not just speed but precision, timing, and an almost mechanical control of the body under extreme duress. It is a sport that eats people alive. Molly thrived in it. By her late teens, she was ranked third in North America. The 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City were not a fantasy. They were a plan. She trained with the obsessive discipline her father had instilled in her from childhood. Hours on the mountain before school. Video analysis after practice. She was 19, then 20, then 21, and the rankings kept climbing. Olympic qualification was within reach. And then one day on a training run in Sun Valley, Idaho, a ski tip caught an edge. She was moving at close to 50 miles per hour when she went down. The fall was brutal. She tore through her knee ligaments, shattered her shoulder, and sustained a spinal injury that doctors told her, bluntly, ended competitive skiing at the elite level. She was 22 years old. It is worth pausing here, because what defines the rest of Molly Bloom's life is not the fall itself. It is what she did on the morning after she understood that the fall was permanent. Another person might have gone home to Colorado. Molly Bloom decided to move to Los Angeles with almost no money and no plan because she could not bear the idea of returning to the world where people knew what she had been before she stopped being it. She arrived in Los Angeles sometime around 2002 with a degree she had not finished, a body that needed months more of rehabilitation, and the particular kind of pride that comes from spending your entire childhood being the best at something. She waitressed, she worked bars, she applied for a law school admissions test and did well. She deferred enrollment, telling herself it would just be a year. That year stretched in ways she had not anticipated. The door that changed everything opened in Hollywood. And it opened the way most doors in Hollywood open, which is to say, sideways, accidentally, and in someone else's story. Through a series of connections at the kinds of clubs and bars where ambitious young women in Los Angeles learn quickly what their options are, Molly found her way into the orbit of a man named Darren Feinstein, one of the owners of the Viper Room, the notorious Sunset Strip Club that had been made infamous years earlier by the death of River Phoenix. Feinstein was running a small, semi-regular poker game, not underground in the organized crime sense, just private, discreet, the kind of game wealthy men use to do business socially. He needed someone to manage the administrative side of it, someone organized, presentable, and smart enough to handle difficult people without causing drama. Molly said yes. She had never seriously played poker. She did not know the difference between pot limit and no limit. She could not have defined the term rake. What she knew was logistics, people, and how to make wealthy men feel attended to. As it turned out, that was almost everything the job required. She spent the next several weeks learning the game. Not the psychology of it, the structure, the chips, the blinds, the buy-ins, the etiquette, the way a professional game runs versus the chaos of an amateur night. She observed, she organized, she made herself indispensable. Within months, she was running the operation rather than assisting with it. And then she got her first good look at who was actually sitting at the table. The night she understood what she had walked into, by her own later account, was a Tuesday in 2004. The players were already seated when she arrived to manage the chips. One face she recognized from a film poster. A second face she placed from a television show she had watched years earlier. A third man she did not recognize, but who carried himself with the particular weight of someone who expects rooms to rearrange themselves around him. She kept her expression neutral. She counted the chips. She made sure the drinks came out correctly. But something had shifted behind her eyes. The game she was managing was not just a poker game. It was a room where Hollywood operated off the record. There was a specific night, and she would later describe this in enough detail to make it undeniable, when she watched a single pot reach into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The player who pushed it forward barely blinked. He was an A-list actor. He was playing with the kind of casual recklessness that only comes from having more money than the loss could register as real. He lost the hand and laughed. He refilled his drink. He asked for more chips. Molly watched all of this and understood. There was something here worth building. The moment the full machine came online began with a falling out. By 2005, her relationship with the man running the original game had soured. The details varied depending on whose account you believe, but the outcome is clear. Molly was out. No game, no income, no access to the room she had spent 2 years cultivating. Most people in that position would have accepted the loss and moved on. Molly did not move on. She spent the following weeks on the phone, calling players she had served, men she had made feel welcome and comfortable over 2 years of Tuesday nights. She called and she said simply, "I am starting my own game." She called the ones she trusted. She called the ones who had tipped her generously. She called the ones who had been kind to her. And one by one, they said yes. She rented space at the Viceroy Hotel in West Hollywood. She hired dealers. She sourced chips. She built, in the span of about 6 weeks, a professional underground poker operation from scratch. She was 26 years old. The first night she ran it independently, she made more in tips than she had made in the previous 3 months combined. Within 6 months, the game had grown. Players were bringing other players. The guest list, which she controlled with absolute authority, began to include names that would eventually be reported in newspapers and memoirs. There was the Academy Award-winning actor who played with reckless speed and tipped generously when he won. There was the professional athlete who came late and stayed until dawn. There was the hedge fund manager from New York who flew in specifically for these nights, because nothing in Manhattan, he told her, felt quite like this. There was also Tobey Maguire. Maguire, the actor who had just finished his run as Spider-Man and was at the height of his Hollywood power, was a serious, competitive, obsessive poker player. He was not a casual fish throwing chips around for fun. He studied the game. He played with intensity. He won frequently and substantially, and he was, by almost all accounts, a complicated presence at the table. Maguire was the nucleus around which the original game had formed. His involvement drew other players. His endorsement, implicit, never stated, simply established by his presence, was the table's most important credential. When Molly secured his continued participation in her independent game, she had effectively secured the game itself. Everyone else followed where Tobey Maguire played. By 2007, Molly's game had become something that operated less like a private social gathering and more like an institution. The buy-in was $50,000. The pots regularly reached $500,000. The players were among the most famous men in American entertainment: actors, directors, producers, athletes, financiers. She had a full-time staff. She had regular dealers she paid well and trusted completely. She had a suite at a hotel she used as a staging area. She was earning by this point somewhere between $3 and $5 million a year. Not salary, tips. Envelopes passed across felt tables by men who had just won $400,000 in a single evening and wanted to show gratitude. She did not take a percentage of the pots. Not yet. That distinction would matter enormously later. She wore this money quietly. She did not flaunt it in the obvious ways. She rented a beautiful apartment. She dressed well. She helped her family financially. She banked the rest, or tried to, though the expenses of running a game of this scale were themselves substantial. The dealers, the hotel suites, the premium spirits, the staff. Running a luxury underground poker game is, paradoxically, an expensive business. She had no contract with any player, no paperwork, nothing in writing. The whole thing ran on reputation. Her reputation, specifically, for discretion, fairness, and creating an environment where extraordinary men could behave ordinarily. There was one name that surfaced again and again in the years that followed, and it was always spoken with a particular combination of admiration and unease. The name was Bad Brad. His real name was Bradley Ruderman, and he was a fund manager from Los Angeles who had been coming to the game since its early days. He was loud, reckless, entertaining, and genuinely bad at poker. He lost enormous sums. He came back, he lost more. He was, for a time, one of the most profitable players at the table, profitable for everyone else, that is, and he kept coming back. Nobody asked how Bradley Ruderman kept producing money to lose. That was not a question you asked in a room like that. By 2009, Molly's game had reached its Los Angeles apex. The numbers being moved across her tables on a good month exceeded $2 million in total pot value. The individual winners, men who had played well or simply run hot, were walking out with six-figure windfalls. The losers went home and came back. She had been, for 5 years, the most successful illegal poker operator in Southern California. And she had done it without a single arrest, without a single serious complaint, and without compromising the privacy of a single player. Then Bradley Ruderman disappeared. Not physically, but in the way that men disappear when the mechanism behind their money collapses. It emerged in 2009 that Ruderman had been running a Ponzi scheme. For years, he had been taking money from investors, tens of millions of dollars, and funneling portions of it to her poker tables, losing it hand by hand, night by night. His fund had nothing behind it. When the scheme collapsed, his investors were ruined, and Molly, by extension, was sitting on money that had originated as stolen funds. She did not know this. She could not have known this. But not knowing it did not protect her from what came next. She has said in the years since that the Ruderman collapse was when the ground shifted under her. It was the first moment she understood that the world around her game was not entirely within her control. She had built a perfect room, ventilated, sealed, controlled, and the outside had broken in. She made a decision. She would leave Los Angeles. She would start over, cleaner, in New York. She would run a tighter operation. And she would, for the first time, take a formal rake, a percentage of each pot, to protect her financially in a way that tips alone could not guarantee. She did not fully think through what that decision meant legally, or perhaps she did think through it and decided that the money was worth the risk. Either way, the rake was the line she had not previously crossed, and she crossed it. She arrived in New York City in 2011 and built the operation from scratch inside a series of hotel suites, primarily at the Peninsula Hotel on Fifth Avenue, a property that projected exactly the kind of discretion and luxury she needed. The New York game was different from Los Angeles in tone. It was harder-edged. The men at the table were not primarily from entertainment. They were from finance, investment bankers, private equity partners, men who moved money for a living and for whom the volatility of a poker table was a familiar sensation. They played with a coldness the Hollywood crowd had never quite matched. The New York game also attracted a different category of problem. In Los Angeles, the problems had been ego and excess, a famous actor who made a scene when he lost, a player who accused another of angle shooting, a night that went until 6 in the morning and had to be delicately shut down before the hotel management noticed. Manageable problems. Human problems. In New York, the problems had weight. There were men at the New York tables who were connected to organized crime in ways that Molly understood at a surface level, but chose not to examine too closely. It was not that she invited them in knowingly. It was that the game, at this scale in this city, attracted people with resources that tended not to come from transparent sources. She knew what the men at her table did for a living only in the broadest strokes. She managed the chips. She managed the evening. She did not ask questions that would require answers she could not afford to hear. By 2012, the New York operation was generating the kind of money that Los Angeles had at its peak. The annual rake, combined with tips, put her income north of $3 million for the year. She had a Manhattan apartment. She had staff. She had a game that ran twice a month and was spoken about, in certain circles, the way exclusive restaurants get spoken about, in whispers, with coordinates not provided until you were already vouched for. The pots in New York were larger than anything she had managed before. On the best nights, a single hand would see over $1 million in play. She watched this money move across a felt table surface and took her percentage and paid her dealers and locked the doors at midnight and did it all again 2 weeks later. There was a specific night in late 2012. The exact date has never been confirmed, when a player at her table lost approximately $1.3 million in a single evening. He came back the following session. She thought it would last forever. That is the only explanation for what comes next that makes psychological sense. She thought the room she had built was permanent because it had survived so much: the Ruderman collapse, the move across the country, the transition from tips to rake, the evolution from Hollywood to finance, that it had begun to feel, in the way that dangerous things sometimes feel, invincible. And then the phone rang. Not her phone, a phone belonging to one of the men connected to the operation, a man whose name she did not fully know and whose involvement she had kept at arm's length. Federal agents had been watching, not just the game, but the entire web of people surrounding it. They had wiretaps. They had surveillance footage from hotel lobbies. They had financial records. They had, above all, time. In late 2013, the FBI moved. The pre-dawn arrest in her Manhattan apartment was part of a coordinated sweep. 34 people were arrested across multiple cities in a single morning. The charges included running an illegal gambling operation and violations of federal racketeering statutes. The RICO Act, the same legal instrument used to dismantle organized crime families. The FBI seized $200,000 in cash from her apartment. They took her laptop, her phones, and documents spanning years of financial records. She was processed. She was charged. She was photographed. And then, in a moment that says almost everything about who Molly Bloom is, she began to think about her defense. She hired a lawyer named Jim Mullen, a former federal prosecutor who had spent decades on both sides of these cases and who understood immediately the exact shape of the problem she faced. The shape was this: the federal government had a strong case. The rake was unambiguous. The money was documented. The witnesses, the players, the dealers, the hotel staff, existed in great numbers. A conviction was the probable outcome of a trial. What Molly had as a bargaining position was information, names, the names of every person who had ever sat at her table, the actors, the athletes, the financiers, the people whose participation in her illegal game would, if disclosed to federal prosecutors, end careers and marriages and reputations that had been built over decades. The FBI wanted those names. She thought about it for a long time. Jim Mullen advised her. She thought about it some more, and then she said no. She said no because she had spent 10 years building a room where powerful men could trust that what happened there stayed there. She had never violated that trust. She was not going to start now, in the worst moment of her life, to save herself. The prosecutors were not entirely prepared for that answer. Her case wound its way through the federal system over the following months. She was not held in custody. She cooperated with investigators in the ways she judged to be appropriate. She was transparent about the game's structure, its finances, its logistics. What she would not provide was names. Her lawyer argued that the game, whatever its legal complexities, was not a front for organized crime, and that Molly herself had no connection to the criminal networks the RICO charges implied. The argument was partially successful. In 2014, Molly Bloom stood before Judge Jed Rakoff in the Southern District of New York. She had pleaded guilty to a single count related to the illegal gambling operation. She made a statement. She spoke about what she had built and why, and what she had refused to do even when her freedom was the price of refusal. Judge Rakoff gave her no prison time. He sentenced her to 1 year of probation and 200 hours of community service. The fine was $200,000, equal to what they had seized from her apartment. In his remarks from the bench, Judge Rakoff said something that was reported widely in the days that followed. He said that her conduct had shown more integrity than one typically sees in the context of this type of case. He meant the refusal to cooperate. He meant the choice she had made. She walked out of the courthouse into the January air and began the process of understanding what her life looked like from the other side. She wrote the memoir in 2014. It was published as Molly's Game, a title she had earned the right to use in ways that few writers can say of their own titles. The book was precise and careful. She named some players by description and circumstance rather than by name. She protected people who had not protected her. She described the full architecture of what she had built, the logistics, the psychology, the money, the collapse, in enough detail to be credible and in enough vagueness to be defensible. It sold well. The story was extraordinary. The story had everything. 3 years later, in 2017, Aaron Sorkin adapted it into a film. Jessica Chastain played Molly Bloom. Idris Elba played the attorney. The film was sharp and fast and received a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination at the Academy Awards. It introduced Molly Bloom to an audience far larger than the one that had read the book. Tobey Maguire, who had been characterized in the book in ways he did not entirely welcome, and had previously sued to block publication of material he considered defamatory, was fictionalized in the film as a composite character. He has never, to the public record's knowledge, spoken on the record at length about his years at Molly Bloom's table. The other players, the full list of everyone who ever sat down across from a dealer in a hotel suite managed by Molly Bloom, has never been officially confirmed. She has never confirmed it. The FBI either could not compel it or concluded the cost of pressing further was not worth what the names would yield. The names remain, to this day, private. Bradley Ruderman, Bad Brad, was convicted on wire fraud and investment advisor fraud charges in 2010, before Molly's own arrest. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. The investors he defrauded lost an estimated $25 million. Of that, a substantial portion had crossed Molly's tables as chips before it disappeared. She was ordered, as part of her own settlement, to pay restitution to some of Ruderman's victims, a detail that has always felt, to those who have followed the story carefully, like an illustration of how complicated it is to be innocent of a crime and still be implicated in its consequences. In the years after the trial, Molly Bloom did not disappear. She gave talks. She appeared on podcasts. She discussed addiction, including her own, which she had developed during the New York period, primarily prescription painkillers that had begun as management of the chronic pain from her ski injury and had become something else entirely. She spoke about recovery. She spoke about what she had built and why and what it had cost. She returned to skiing, not competition. That door had been closed for 20 years. But she returned to the mountains, to the sensation she had been in love with before her career on the slopes ended on a training run in Idaho. There is something quietly resonant about that image, the woman who built an empire in airless hotel suites, returning to the open air. She has spoken about her father, the psychology professor, the coach, in terms that are complicated and honest. Their relationship was central to her story in ways she only partially understood while living it. The drive he installed in her, the need to be extraordinary, the inability to accept ordinary outcomes. She has said that she does not blame him. She has said that she understands now where the engine came from and what it was originally built to do. She has said a lot of things, carefully, in the manner of someone who has spent considerable time thinking about how language lands. The game is gone. The suites are occupied by other guests. The chips are in boxes or casinos or landfills. The men who sat at those tables have moved on, mostly, back to their films and their funds and their lives, slightly richer or poorer for the experience, their names still unconfirmed, their nights still private. Molly Bloom lives in California. She appears to be, by all available accounts, well. There is a photograph taken the day she left the courthouse in 2014. She is in a dark coat. Her expression is not what you might expect from someone who has just avoided federal prison. It is not relief exactly. It is something quieter, something that looks, from a certain angle, like the face of a person who has survived the part of their life they built and is now standing at the beginning of the part they have not yet imagined. She earned millions running rooms where no one asked too many questions. In the end, the only thing that saved her was the one question she refused to answer.